Everybody for being here tonight. We have a really great event for you. WPN has sponsored this Adulting 101 Ask an Alumni, and it's especially for seniors, and we also have some graduate students I see. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Carolina Silva from the class of 2016. We also have, as part of our panel, Tori McGrath. You are class of 16 as well, and masters from 17. I have Tatum Colitz here, and she's from class of 13, masters in 15. Andrea De Loney, class of 10, and Joanna Ciavarella, class of 2011. So we're gonna get started right now, and I will pass it over to Carolina, and she has some great stuff for you guys about growing up and leaving college.
Thank you, Kristin. So before we start, I just wanted to give some background as to why we're here and why we came up with the idea of this event. So I can see some of the attendees, not everybody comes from the Women's Professional Network. So I think for those of you who are on campus, you know the Women's Professional Network is one of the professional development organizations at Wagner that really is looking to bridge the gap between students and alumni. And so with the Women's Professional Network, we actually have an alumni initiative, which Tori and Joanna have been a part of, and Tatum and Andrew are really active with some of the other parts of the Alumni Association. But when we were thinking about programming, one of the things that we came up with as alum was going back and thinking about what it felt like to be in your senior year at Wagner and thinking about what that transition, what that next step is going to look like. And so what we decided with WPN, this is the second iteration of this event, we thought about what is everything that we wish we knew before we graduated. Not only that, everything that we wish we knew that first year, that second year out of Wagner, what we wish somebody told us. And so I'm fired up for tonight's session because all of the panelists that we have here tonight are incredible women who have done remarkable things, like very powerful things since their time at Wagner. So I'm like sitting here as moderator, I'm excited to be learning from everybody here. So we're going to be covering 3 themes for tonight. We're going to be talking about life immediately after Wagner, like thinking about you're a graduating senior, what immediately comes next after graduation. We're going to talk about managing money. You're going from being a college student to being an adult, and you have to worry about money. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that we navigated through that. And then we're going to talk about work-life balance, right? Right now, all of you are students, and your full-time job essentially is to be a student. Now, thinking about how do you balance your work and having a personal life? So to start off, I just want to ask, let's start off with the first topic, life after Wagner. What is one thing that each of you wish that you knew before you graduated? Any of you can go first.
I can go first. I think one of the things that I wish I kind of had somebody explain to me, and this is a hard thing to kind of grasp when you're coming out of college, just because it's so hard to even imagine like what your career is going to look like. But I think one of the things I kind of wish I did was just kind of take a breath and just be like, okay, my career is going to be very long, and I'm going to find my way into exactly what I want to do. My path coming out of college was I did a Big Four public accounting internship. And with that, it's done your summer before your senior year. And then you get this offer at this amazing firm and you just kind of feel like locked into it. You then do your senior year and then you do a master's. Most people do a master's afterwards, and then you start off on this great career. But I think I was really nervous about, I don't know if this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that's just really not something that you need to worry about, especially when you're just coming out of college. I would say, take the right steps, do the right internships and try your best. Go into your job when you first start and work as hard as you can. And then just trust that you know, you'll meet people that can guide you, you'll make a network, and you'll figure it out as you go.
Thank you, Tori. Tatum, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think Tori gave some really good examples, and similar to Tori's path, I think when I graduated college, I didn't have a plan. And that was something that was really scary for me. I was someone that was very much a linear path: go to college, do the best you can there, excel, take advantage of every opportunity. But I didn't have a job offer the day of graduation, and that panicked me. I had been interviewing, I had some different opportunities in the mix, but on that day, I remember people coming up, "What's your plan? What are you doing next?" And I didn't have an answer. And that was the first time in my life where that was really the case. Everything else had been really planned. Thankfully, 2 weeks after graduation, I got a call that I was offered a position in the athletic department. And I think the piece of advice I would give is, if you're someone that likes having things checked off, having a plan, know that if you're following your passion, you're following things that are really intentional and part of who you are and what you want to do down the road, it's going to work out the right way eventually. And also to not underestimate the power of relationships. The roles that I've received in working in college athletics and administration, they really all go back to strong relationships, being really intentional, being really planted where my feet are. And I think that's paid off down the road. So even though it feels like you need to check the next box, be intentional with your relationships and be authentic with those, because that can open doors and a network more than you even realize. So.
Yeah, I love that advice. I absolutely love what Tori mentioned as well, in terms of just being patient and being very gentle with yourself, especially with the times that we're in and how many job markets are across industries. And certainly, you know, be vocal about what you're interested in as you prepare for graduation. So make sure that, you know, if your parents, friends are around, or your neighbors are around, or if you're at your place of worship, or whatever spaces you find yourself in, safely and physically distanced, of course, make sure that you're sharing what your interests are. Let your personal network, your family, your community know what your degree is and what types of opportunities you're starting to look at, because you never know who someone else knows, who knows someone else, who knows someone else. And very similar to Tatum, you know, my career path has certainly been the reward of establishing a very intentional, solid personal and professional network. So definitely make sure you're actively sharing what you're looking for. And also don't be afraid to take risks, especially in this virtual space. So when you're on LinkedIn, don't just be looking for jobs and assuming that because you're applying, the job will come to you, but check out some of these free virtual conferences. Make sure you're connecting and sending messages and follow-ups to those people who are speaking in those events. But definitely make sure that you're just actively looking to build your network, whether it's in your immediate circle or in your virtual communities.
Yes, I agree with all of these points, and particularly with the concept of, you know, being patient with yourself. For my own experiences, I didn't start my you know, a job right after graduation because I went to graduate school. So, and I think advice I would give is that recognize that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So you don't have to know what you want to do immediately after undergrad, and you don't have to jump into a job immediately either. So I went on directly for a master's and then a doctorate right after. So, you know, it was a lot more schooling. And if you are going to do graduate school directly after undergrad, also recognize that you will have some different experiences than some of your friends who are in the workforce, you know, immediately. And graduate school is a great opportunity to explore a city you might want to try out. So I moved to Rhode Island for 2 years to get my master's at Brown. So it's a different experience being a New York native and having attended Wagner. So take, you know, lean on particularly your professors when it comes to graduate school advice, if that's something you're interested in, but also recognize you don't have to get a master's directly after undergrad either. So you can go into the workforce, but always remember you have that, you know, you can pursue your studies again after.
Thank you. And I think what's really important to point out is that everybody here had a different step or a different path that they took in their life after Wagner. And I think when I think about what I wish I knew, it's not necessarily like something specific that I wish I knew, but more so of reframing your mindset. So when you think about what it was like when you were a senior in high school, maybe some of you knew right away that you were going to Wagner, and maybe some of you really didn't. So like thinking about, Andrea, what's that shake for? You didn't know? So I would say like thinking about your life in different stages and different chapters, right? So like when you were in 8th grade, the thought of going into high school, you're like, oh, what is that going to look like? You have no idea what that's going to look like. And then going into your senior year of high school, you had no idea what it was going to look like, but you knew that you were going to be okay. So when I think about the first, because Tori and I are 5 years out now, when I think about the first 5 years of my career, I see it as, oh, it's just like another 4 years of high school or another 4 years of college. It's just that next stage in my life. And when you look back now as a senior in college, thinking about, oh my gosh, all the things that I know now that I wish I knew when I was a freshman, like that's just the cycle of life. You're always going to be going through these phases, and just know, just in the same way that you figured it out from being a freshman at Wagner to being a senior at Wagner, or being a freshman at college and being a senior in college, like you're going to figure it out. Life will take care of itself. So the next thing that we want to talk about is managing your money, like managing your budget. So one of the first things, not everybody goes straight into working after graduating, but for those of you who did, you kind of have to have a different mindset, right? Accepting that first job offer. I know personally for me, one of the things that I didn't do was negotiate my salary. I was just happy to have a job. So for those of you here, and again, it doesn't really matter if you had a job right after Wagner or not, what are some of the ways that you approach negotiating your salary for the first job that you ever did have? And what are some of the public tools that you could probably use to do your research and do your homework to be able to do that, to negotiate your salary?
Yeah, I love that question. I think one of the things for me is that although I knew I didn't have much formal work experience once I graduated and I started interviewing, I knew that I had a lot of great characteristics and skills that I developed throughout my 4 years at Wagner. So whether it was by way of the different organizations I was a part of, different projects that I supported the deans with throughout the 4 years, I really did leverage that experience, and I really did sell that experience, when going on interviews. And I think in terms of tools, once I realized that my career was taking me in the direction of HR, and similar to you, Tori, I started my career off in recruiting as well for an agency. I leveraged the insight and the coaching from my mentors. So I shared with them postings that I was applying to. I looked a lot on Glassdoor and just sites like that, and now more so LinkedIn, that really do provide salary comparison tools and things to really compare and see what are industries offering here in New York State, what are industries offering in other cities with comparable costs of living. And then I just combined all of that information and practiced. I practiced the conversation in front of the mirror to make sure that my face expression came across as being confident but humble, assertive, but coachable and willing to learn. And I think just through taking those steps, it really did put me in a position to be happy with the first offer that I received out of college.
I would definitely agree with too, like what you had mentioned. Use your resources. Like there are so many great tools out there. Glassdoor and LinkedIn, like you mentioned. And I know from my experience coming right out of college, I was going into a place that had a pretty rigid comp structure. So there wasn't necessarily like a negotiating practice going on. Everybody was kind of coming in at the same exact amount, depending on what office you were working at. But I would say, as you move on in your career, you definitely want to make sure that you are keeping those things in mind as you move up, that like you said, you can leverage some of those things that you bring to the table, and you want to make sure you're never selling yourself short, because the people who are having those compensation conversations with you aren't going to be necessarily looking out for, okay, we want to try to give this person as much money as we can because they deserve it. You have to be your best advocate in that sense.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything that's been said so far. And I can say I definitely did not negotiate my first job offer. I was just thrilled to have something that was full-time and salaried when that came along. So my first negotiating experience was the current job that I'm in at Seton Hall as a senior associate athletic director. And honestly, it goes back to my first answer, where it was my network and those mentors around me, where I actually found out kind of what the salary paid because I had a connection and a network to the person leaving that position. So I knew going in what that individual was paid. It's a private institution, it's not publicized, but because of a network and because of connections, that allowed me to, when I did get the offer and had some room to have conversations, I really know what the position paid in the past. I knew what my worth was to bring to the table. And that allowed me to have some conversations that I felt a little bit more informed. I had the ability to research and have the data points. And it really empowered me to know that, again, this is a position and this is what they've been able to pay. There's a knowledge that that could be a position that I could still hold. And I think at the end of the day, it was that confidence that you've done the work. Once you have that offer in front of you, they want you. And I think that's really empowering, whether it's a first-time job, a job down the road at an executive level, taking advantage of that and using a network if there are people in the industry that you can research within.
Yeah, I agree with all of the above, particularly about research. So for, and maybe that's the scientist in me, but I think it's really important to do your own research. And Glassdoor is a great tool, as well as, talking, with your network. But I think one thing that I wish I knew as someone who's taught at a variety of universities and as an adjunct simultaneously is recognizing that even if a salary is not negotiable, one thing I wish I did more research on at certain points was looking into what responsibilities and the time commitment of different positions, because not all jobs have the same work-life balance. And just because a certain salary might be desirable, the hours or what you're required to do outside of the 9 to 5 may not, as well as the support system. So sometimes I've had universities that offered very nice, comparatively salaries to others, but did not have any of the support tools that some of the smaller universities have when it comes to assistance with grading or, class sizes, teaching 10 students versus 300 students, even if the salary might be a little bit more for the 300 student class. So I think negotiating, even when that's not possible for your salary, it's always good to talk about, well, what are some of the incentives that this job may offer outside of just the dollar amount that I can consider.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's kind of important to point out when it comes to negotiating salary is the fact that if whatever your first job is, whatever you start off being paid at, if you want to stay at that company, and again, I'm going to come from the corporate mindset because I'm in the corporate world. Usually the way that raises happen, it's based off of it's a percentage based off of what you're already being paid. So if you don't do the effort of trying to negotiate yourself from up front, over time, you're losing out on a lot of future potential earnings. And then the other part of that is your first job isn't necessarily your forever job. So I don't know, and maybe Tori and Andrea from a recruiting standpoint, you'd have an opinion on this, but I believe in the state of New York, whatever prospective employer that you're going to can't ask you what you were previously being paid. So if you're thinking about having one career at one company, it benefits you to do the research up front, because the raises will be based off of a percentage of what you're already making, versus if you jump ship and go somewhere else. And sometimes that's what ends up happening. People have a low pay at their first job, and then they get a huge jump at the second job that they take. I don't know, Tori, if you've seen that in your life.
Yeah, that's really common. I think from what I've seen, people kind of go in, do their first job, and they get that experience under their belt, and then that's where they can take it to market and see what they can do. Depending on the industry, sometimes even your second job won't be that quote unquote money move, but you continue taking the right steps towards where you ultimately want to be. And then, once you do have that skill set for that bigger job, the better experience you have, the more you'll see with your compensation, I'd say.
Yeah. And I think now more than ever, as women, we're in such a position to say what we want and get what we want. With our new leadership in this country, there's a lot of conversation around legislation being passed regarding pay equity. And a lot of organizations are having that conversation to ensure that whether you are a woman coming into the workforce with 10 years of experience or you're coming straight out of college, to ensure that your salaries are aligning with your male counterparts. So don't be afraid to do that research, not only from a standpoint of what the roles that you're interested in are offering, but see what legislation is being passed and how that's going to impact whatever prospective state that you're planning to settle down in after college and start your career journey.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about getting your first job, and this might not apply to everybody that's listening to this, but for some of us, 6 months after graduation, you have a bill that's coming due, and it's called student loans. So for those of you here who have experience with student loans, what are some of the tips that you have, or some of the ways that you navigated through paying back your student loans?
I think for me, something that was really important was learning and understanding what type of support resources were available through the institutions that I had loans with. You know, you'll be surprised what types of, you know, payment plans or scheduling or, you know, negotiating interest rates, whatever it may be. There's just so much that these institutions are able to do that they're not going to tell you they're able to do. And I know for myself, it was one of those things where I had a conversation with my mom, who was a co-signer on majority of my loans, as well as my late father. And we made appointments and we went in, and she told me, this is your loan now. Ask whatever questions you need to ask, explain to them where you're at and what your plan is going to be and what you can afford. And you work this program out to where it's going to support you with where you are now. And then over time, once you get, you know, more situated and acclimated into your career, you'll be able to explore other options that align with what you can afford at that time. So ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on this? Joanna?
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point, because it is something that they're not going to come to you with the options. So you want to ask your questions, and also recognize that there are some programs, depending on what you plan to do after graduation. So whether it be through, if you're in the education field, certain positions will come with, you know, loan forgiveness options. And if you do plan on pursuing a master's or anything after graduation, recognizing that there is flexibility with you know, graduate assistantships and teaching assistantships. So although, you know, to eliminate taking on additional loans, you can take on a teaching position that will cover some of graduate school, or some teaching positions will help pay back your loans. So there are options, but you definitely have to do your research, because it takes a little to navigate. And don't be afraid to ask questions, and also ask questions of your peers and, you know, others who have gone through the process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, sorry, Tatum, were you going to say something?
You go. I feel like you're on a good thought.
No, I was just going to say, like, as somebody who works in the financial services industry, there is so much money to be made off of people who don't know what they're doing with their money. And so this comes back into, like, knowledge is power. And we all live in this beautiful era of technology where you can do a lot of research and fact check. I think sometimes you're basically going to be sold by a bunch of different student loan providers. Oh, like refinance, reconsolidate, do all of these different things. And, like, it's so important that you do your homework, and using some of the government website resources are probably going to be your best bet. And cross-referencing some of the resources and some of the information that you're getting. And when it comes to making any type of financial decision, student loan or not, you have to make the decision that makes sense for you. And what I mean by that is that no matter what financial decision that you make, there are going to be pros and cons to that decision. And so as long as you can live, first you have to understand what the, like, upside and downside is of whatever financial decision that you're making. You have to be able to live with that decision. That's the second part. So I don't know, Tatum, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, and it kind of goes off of what you mentioned, and it's just a personal perspective. In about 2 years ago, I was thinking about, I got all of those SoFi letters and the different providers in the mail of consolidate, will lower your rate. And I got close to considering it, and I'm so glad I didn't, because look at the political cycle this past year. And had I consolidated and gone with a private lender, I wouldn't have had the ability to pay back my capital and just pay down that overall student loan rate without the interest tacked on. So I'm so happy I didn't. And I'm in a situation where I've been really focused on trying to get out for my student loans, and I'm close to finished, which is really exciting. But it's something where, had I done that, I would have had that opportunity to really not hit pause or focus on that principal balance. So know the political impact of student loans as well, and how the political cycle rolls. I know it's a big topic right now with the presidential changes. So just as much as politics and money are two of those scary topics to think about, it's really knowledge is power in both the financial sector and then the social and political impact of it. So watch the news, make sure you know what's going on, because it sounds like there might be something forgiven. So mute myself until it happens.
Fingers crossed. We'll see what happens, but we could definitely spend like an entire hour talking about student loans alone. But the next money question that I have for this panel is, what are some money lessons that you learned the hard way? So through whatever money mistakes that you made, that you want to share your wisdom with our listeners, what are some of those lessons you learned the hard way?
One of the things that I have, it's kind of not something I learned the hard way, but just something very, very stupid that I did. So I started my first job, and I was filling out like all of my 401k stuff. And my dad had like drilled it into my head, like put in as much as they'll match, all this stuff. And I was like, okay, my dad's gonna be so proud, I'm doing all this stuff. And in my head, I hit submit, and I must not have. And it wasn't until I was later on looking for new jobs, and I was like, oh, I should just check in on this, that I realized that I had never hit the submit button. And there was a good chunk of time that, and I was just like, wow, that's a lot of money that I just missed out on, because I was just like, okay, out of sight, out of mind. And for those like 401k things, you don't want to be looking at it every day, but just make sure that you go back, check in on it, make sure that it makes sense. Try to get some advice from people that you know in your network, things like that, that those things are getting put into, depending on what the plan is, that those things are getting set up correctly. Index funds, things like that are great things to kind of keep in mind for that. But yeah, definitely make sure you hit submit on your 401k setup plan. And that was definitely one of my biggest mistakes. But then one of the other things that I would say too, like you get your first paycheck, you feel like you just made so much money and you can buy anything you want. But the little things add up. I remember like with Ubers and going out to get drinks and, just those little things, they really eat away at how much money you're making. And if you don't kind of have a good gauge on what your wiggle room is for your budget, what your rent is, what your other costs are, those things can really eat into that very quickly.
Yeah, all great points. I think for me, I wish I would have adopted that whole saving up for a rainy day concept, and ensuring that you have at least 6 months of savings in case of an emergency to cover your primary expenses. I remember, in my first career position after finishing undergrad, and I was working for a staffing agency, and everything just seemed so euphoric until I hit that second year, and I was miserable, so miserable, to the point where I was like, listen, I'd rather be out of work struggling and figuring life out than staying in this office culture. And that's exactly what ended up happening. And I was so focused on getting out of that environment that I didn't consider my student loan payment was coming back around the following month, or my phone bill, or all of the other expenses that I had. And so if there's anything that I can say is that, once you get that first position, whether it's that dream job that puts you in your career path, or just that first job that helps to put money in your pocket, make sure that, after looking at what your expenses are, it's almost like an allowance. So taking a certain amount and putting it to the side, and that's your funds that are untouched. And that's for your emergency situations, whether there's an emergency bill that comes up, or something with your car needs to be fixed, or there's a health emergency, whatever it is. But at least you're putting that money aside to take care of you and support you in the future.
I think both topics so far have been really, really good. Mine is, it's going to sound really silly, but learning to say no to weddings and events. I feel like I went to, and I'm not kidding when I say over 40 weddings in the early part of my 20s through today. And it is so expensive. I mean, I'm talking flights, travel. We had a Hawaii wedding. I mean, we did a lot of weddings, and I did a search the past couple of months just because I was trying to figure out how much we've spent over the past 10 years going to weddings. And it was significant. And I didn't realize it at the time because it's an experience, it's memories, it's people you love and care about. But I use this as an example to say it's still important to have those moments and those experiences, but understand that it's still okay to say no, and to rationalize and to figure out what you're saying yes to and what those long-term effects are, because now we're trying to plan our own wedding and the savings that we've spent on all these other weddings comes into play. So I think that's just one example from my early budgeting and savings, that know what's really important and align your budget to match that.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Tatum, with that point, because also as someone who was in graduate school right after, and people start having lots of events, like it's okay to recognize that you're in a different position because you're trying to pay for, you don't have that same full-time salary as your peers, and that's okay. So certain things like destination weddings were just not really an option at the time, in my early 20s. But I think also, and for anyone who says, oh, but it comes back around when it's your turn, that's not accurate at all, because my wedding was canceled for COVID. So no one had to go to a wedding for me. So they all got a free pass. But I would also say that recognizing that cost of living is different in different cities was something that I did not anticipate. Going from Providence to moving back into New York, particularly Manhattan, it took me a few months to realize that my spending had to be curtailed. My rent was not the same. Just the cost for transportation was a lot different. And even, going out, socializing, happy hours are more expensive in Manhattan than in Providence. So recognizing that if you do move and things like that, put that into your budget, because cost of living is not universal, even in city environments. So that was something I didn't anticipate as much as I should have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with some of the things that have already been said. I think, especially when you're coming out of college, like when you're at Wagner, you've got your group of friends, like you all go to like whatever bar it is that you want to go to. And like you all kind of are in the same thing, like the same stage. But I think one of the things that was like hardest for me when I graduated was recognizing that not everybody's financial situation is the same. And we live in an era of social media where it's like you have friends who are going out to happy hour, to cocktails, and they're going on trips and they're doing all these things. And like to have this FOMO when it comes to things that are ultimately like financial experiences, or, for me, I chose to live on Staten Island versus living in the city right out of graduating, because I knew the difference in rent was going to be significant. And whereas I had friends who I graduated with who could move into the city right away, and I just like couldn't figure out the math as to like, how is it even possible? Like, are they really making that much more money than me? It's like, no, their parents are helping them out. So like, you have to understand that or they didn't have student loans. Like everybody's financial situation is going to be completely different. And if you try to play this game of keeping up with others, it's a very slippery slope. And like, it's something that you definitely have to be honest with yourself. And I think budgeting is the best way, where like the numbers will tell you the story that you need to know, versus like this lifestyle that may or may not be realistic to you. So the last topic or the last theme that we want to talk about before we open it up for Q&A is work-life balance. So work-life balance is almost like a buzzword that I hate, but I know that it's important at the same time. And so I'm curious to hear from all of you, let's talk about like what work-life balance ultimately is, and how did you experience the transition of finding work-life balance right after you graduated, then thinking about life before COVID, and how you might be thinking about work-life balance differently now in this like new normal of COVID. I think a lot of the times, especially when you're at Wagner, your life is all school. Then you graduate and then your life is really all work. And then there's life that you have to figure out. So again, I'm curious for what everybody here has experienced and how they've navigated finding that balance.
I mean, I know for me, after I finished at Wagner, my mindset was like just that grind. Like I worked my butt off nonstop. I was the last one to leave the office, first one into the office. And my mom and my pastor were the ones who had to tell me to slow down, because I was just always wanting to take on every single project, because I wanted to make sure that I was building my brand, I was building my reputation within my field. And when I fast forward now, and of course, understanding what it means to work smarter and not harder, I certainly do look back and wish that, you know, I would have taken advantage of that paid time off that I had earned at many companies prior to where I'm currently at. And now I'm in a place in my career where if I feel tired, if I feel like I'm getting to that point where, you know, my critical thinking isn't as sharp, or I'm not, you know, as on top of things as I normally am, I'm taking that time off. And something at Northwell, being, you know, a health system and with a very large focus on well-being, you know, taking advantage of those resources that are available through your employers is so important, because they make them available to you, right? They design these wellness programs so that way they're taking care of their workforce. Don't be afraid to take advantage of that. Don't be afraid to have conversations with your leadership around, you know, what support looks like, what needs you may have. And I think now, being in this virtual space, depending on your field, it certainly is a lot easier to have that flexibility throughout your workday if you are working in a remote setting. But it's just important to, you know, I like to think of it not so much of work-life balance, but work-life harmony, because this week, you know, my schedule may require me to work longer hours, but it's because that's what I want to do. But next week, if I have, you know, virtual birthday parties or drive-by birthday parties or whatever it is that, you know, people are doing, then that's going to be the harmony that I need in my life for next week. So just being realistic about, you know, what it is, what season am I in? Am I in a season where I know that in order to get to that next stage, it's going to require X, Y, and Z of me? Then that's what's going to be required. But I know that that's going to be a short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain in my life.
Cool. I love that term, the work-life harmony, because I think I also, that buzzword of work-life balance, I don't think it exists, at least in the industry that I'm in, working in college athletics. It's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I'm in South Carolina right now for Big East championships. You're always on, you're always doing something, but I view it as work-life integration. I think that's something that's really important in the industry that I've decided to dedicate my career to, is bringing my whole self to that career and making sure that the place that I'm working aligns with those values. So I think when I chose this position and got the opportunity at Seton Hall, I knew I was going to work for a department that embraced friendships, family. I get to bring my dog to tennis matches if I'm there on the weekend. I know for this upcoming season, our women's basketball team is going to be playing a tournament in Cancun over Thanksgiving, and bringing my fiance was something that was part of that conversation. If I'm going to be away for that holiday, is that something I can bring my partner with me? And that was something that my company was comfortable with. So I think it's really industry specific. And if it's a job or a position that you find joy in and you find purpose and passion, I just know this industry is a little bit different, but that's something that I feel it's all about balance, but it's also about integrating yourself into that role. And if that's something that you align yourself in your position, bringing your whole self to that position.
I think one of the biggest things for me when I was kind of figuring out this whole like having the hours that you work and trying to lead you know, a healthy lifestyle and having that balance. So when I first started, the 2 jobs that I've had, being in public audit and now doing recruiting, both have very busy schedules. I'd say what I do now, I have more control of my schedule, but I think when I was at KPMG, I felt more like I just had to wake up as late as I could to get where I needed to go, just get through the day as best as I could, have a bunch of coffees, things like that. Whereas when I made the transition to what I'm doing now, the people that I work with and that have been doing this for a while, they have a better approach to that. And it's more of, you know, have a plan for the day, start your day off with the same routine. I got into a habit of working out before work, getting in early, you know, maybe having a coffee in the morning and then switching it over to like tea in the afternoons. And then just really trying to focus on, okay, how am I going to give myself the energy to get through the day and, you know, attack it and do a good job. And then, you know, the earlier I get in, you know, if I wanted to duck out at like 5:30 or 6 one day, I would have the opportunity of doing that. And I think that really planning and having a routine is something that really helped me feel like the hours weren't as grueling. And then now with COVID, obviously having a plan for your day is so huge because, you know, there might be a little leeway where maybe you can like pop out and go to the grocery store in the middle of the day or do a workout in the afternoon instead of waking up at 5 a.m. But if you don't have your day planned out of things to go back to after you finish those things, it can feel like you're very unorganized and you kind of waste a lot of the day. Like maybe you come back and it's hard to get refocused if you don't really know what to get back into. So with COVID and that whole world, I think that was one of the things that I really learned was I have to plan my day, especially if I'm going to take little breaks like this. I need to know where to jump back into.
Yeah, I think like having a schedule, like Tori said, is so important because especially if you're managing a lot of different tasks at work or also different, you know, positions, different jobs. If I don't have a schedule, I will not remember which class I'm teaching at what time. So it's important to keep that. And I really like the term Tatum work-life, you know, integration, because I think that, you know, when you have certain things you're passionate about, so for example, tennis, you know, being a student athlete at Wagner was something I really wanted to incorporate into my career, even though it's not my, you know, athletics isn't my full-time career, but I do coach a collegiate tennis team. So even though that's an additional, you know, work experience, it's something that for my personal life was very important to me. So you can kind of find ways to integrate what you're passionate about into your work, even if it's not always possible for it to be your full-time. So I try to look for those types of opportunities to make my work life, you know, become more of a cohesive mix.
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of, I don't like work-life balance. I do like work-life integration because I think it's more authentic and more true. But I think what I would want the listeners to take away, I think it's really important that you understand the type of life that you want to have and what lifestyle, the industries that you're looking at. Like if those two things don't align, then you're not going to be happy. Like you're going to be spending at a minimum 40 hours a week working, on the higher end, maybe 80 plus hours, depending on the industry that you're working in. If you don't like what you're doing and you don't like waking up every single morning to do whatever it is that you're planning on doing, like that's a really big red flag. So if the thought of working 12 plus hours a day does not sound attractive to you, then you should probably think about a different career path. So to close ourselves out, I wanted to hear again, the whole theme of this panel is Adulting 101. So if you wanted to give one key takeaway or one piece of advice to our listeners, what would that be?
I would say trust your instincts as much as you want to maybe plan ahead. And I know I definitely did. Trust that you know what you're passionate about and pursue something that you're really going to enjoy, like Carolina said, waking up every day and doing, whether that's a job, an industry, a passion, how you live your life. Follow what you know that you really, really want to do.
I would say to go off of that too, it's okay if you don't know what you want to do right now. Sometimes you think that, you know, where you're going right now is what you want, and you get into that, and, you know, maybe it's not something that you love, but you meet you meet people at your company and you get to see, oh, this person's doing something else that looks a little bit more interesting to me. How do I pursue that? And then just really staying true to trying to figure those things out as you go. And again, not knowing it right now is totally normal. And if you do have a set idea of what you want to do, you know, I would be surprised if that didn't change a little bit as you went on in your career as well.
I would say strive for excellence and not for perfection. Because, you know, just like Tori said, the things that you visualize now or think that you want now are certainly going to change and evolve over time, and as you gain more experience, not just from a work standpoint, but in life. So always operate from the place of whatever I'm going to do today, I'm going to do it in the most excellent way possible, because that's how your skills are going to develop. That's how your network is going to notice you and expand. And that's really what's going to support you and putting you in the places and spaces that you want to see yourself in and want to be in.
Yeah, and I would just add, you know, I think all these points are so great. And I would say that one thing I wish I was more comfortable with when I first graduated that I've now learned to embrace is change. And I think life is about change. And, you know, what I'm doing right now may not be what I'm doing 10 years from now. And I think it's important to really always look for opportunities to learn about different, you know, fields and learn about different careers and different jobs. And I constantly, you know, even as someone who works in academia and as a chemist, I attend, you know, webinars about, you know, biotech consulting and all these different things, because, you know, 5-10 years from now, I may be doing something completely different. And I find that, you know, very exciting. And I try to approach, you know, my career like I approach science. You go in with a hypothesis, but you want to explore and come out with, you know, a great conclusion, and you don't cling to that hypothesis just to prove yourself right. You want to actually discover something. So I try to, you know, treat my career in that way, and I'm open, you know, to any new and exciting opportunity.
I love that mindset. I love everything that's been said. I would definitely say, like, you know, continue to meet people and to network. You really don't know where your next opportunity is going to come from. And you don't know if there's a job out there that you don't even know exists. So I think it's important to Joanna's point, to always be learning and to always be doing your research, but just talking to people and like meeting new people, reaching outside of what you're seeing in your day-to-day. It's going to expand your mind, and it either affirms what you're already doing or it opens your mind to doing something that you didn't even know or didn't even think about. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. So for those of you, you can submit your questions on the Q&A. We also want, like, for the listeners that are here, you can submit it on the questions and answers. You can also submit messages to the panelists directly through the chat. While that gets sent over, we do have some pre-submitted questions. I know some of the panelists, you can actually see some of those pre-submitted questions. So I want to give the opportunity that if there is one question that you really like that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to today. How about this one? What advice would you give to those who will continue on to getting a master's degree?
For that one of the things that I personally did was just really look within Wagner. There are a lot of opportunities for working on campus. That was one of the things that really helped me out. I also happened to get involved with fencing, but I don't think that everybody has the opportunity. I think they're a little bit more established now. So, you know, I don't think they'll just take anybody anymore, but definitely check out those avenues because Wagner has a lot of good ones.
I know for me, you know, I got my my master's degree 10 years after undergrad, and I knew I wanted to get my master's. I had a feeling that my career would take me down a path where that would be my competitive advantage. But I was so intentional in making sure that I was going to be working somewhere that would pay for it. So I didn't have to worry about the expense of going to grad school. So I would say, you know, unless you are currently pursuing something that you know higher education will require that in order for you to be qualified and eligible for certain positions, definitely start looking at companies that offer that as part of the total offer package, understanding when that benefit kicks in, and then plan that journey towards an MBA or a PhD or a doctorate, whatever additional degrees that you may be interested in, plan it based around that.
It's such good advice. And I think I was one of those master's students that the master's was a gateway to the experience as a graduate assistant and working in athletics. So it was the same idea that I didn't know what I wanted to do academically. I knew I wanted a master's. So I don't technically use my master's of education on the day-to-day in what I do, even though I tell people all the time, working with coaches, working with student athletes, everything is like education. It's all development. It's all planning and process. But also knowing that a lot of companies down the road, if you did want to go back to school, they do offer some really competitive programs. I know I've looked into some different things in my current position of advanced degrees, law degrees, PhD programs, and many companies, depending what you're going into, will have some kind of competitive offer. But it's just knowing what your plan is and your timeline is. And ultimately, the master's degree also helped push student loans a little bit. So that's not to be forgotten.
And then Joanna, I feel like you're the doctor on this one.
No, I think all of those points are great. And I would just add, you know, definitely look into positions wherever you're interested in. So if you do want to go for your master's right after, you know, like Wagner has a lot of graduate assistantships, but other universities do as well. So like my master's was fully funded because I was willing to teach classes while I was there, which was great. And it still does like push off the student loan payments for undergrad because you're enrolled in a graduate program. So look into ways because if you can get it funded, it's definitely, I'd rather look into it ahead of time than pay for a year and realize that I could have gotten it paid for.
These are some good points. So we got some anonymous questions submitted. I like this one. What is your advice for dealing with the ambiguity or uncertainty that comes with not knowing what the next step is?
I think that goes back to the sentiments that a lot of us mentioned earlier. Just take that deep breath and understand that, one, it's perfectly fine to be in an ambiguous space. Last year, 9 years into my career, I was in a very ambiguous space where I didn't know what my next move would be. I think, when being in that space after recently graduating, the first step is to focus on the things that you can focus on and control, right? So you can control what type of organization you join and what type of people you can at least start to meet, to have, like Carolina mentioned earlier, start having conversations with people. A lot of organizations will offer a discounted student membership. So if $20 or $50 per year is what the annual dues are for an organization that links directly to your industry, make that investment and start surrounding yourself with the people that are in positions where you aspire to be in, or who could potentially point you in the right direction. And have fun with the networking, have fun with going to different events, or of course now virtually, but really just put yourself out there socially in a professional manner.
I think any change that you go through is always going to be scary and uncertain. I see it a lot with candidates when they make job moves. they'll come to me at the beginning of the process and say, these are my reasons why I want to leave this job. I'm really excited to make a change, and I'm actively looking to take on a new job move. And then when it gets down to actually making that change, you can tell that they start to kind of feel that fear of leaving, you know, the place that they've been working. They know everybody there. They're going into this new opportunity. And you kind of just have to trust yourself that you did your due diligence on wherever your next step is. Trust the facts of it. Like Andrea was saying, like, you know, you're looking at the company that you're going to. They have a good reputation, and really hold on to those facts and trust that you're making the right decision. And, you know, it's always going to be scary no matter when you make a new change or a big change.
So another question that came in was, when moving to a new city after graduation, how do you suggest meeting new people outside of your coworkers?
So one thing I would say is to look at the things that you're passionate about. So for myself, I was really passionate about being involved with certain nonprofits. So I serve on the board for the Young Professionals Group for the ALS Association. So joining that group when I moved to Providence, and then when I moved back to New York, was a great way to meet people that were also interested in, you know, something I was interested in. So definitely also think about the groups you're involved with at Wagner. So if you're in any affinity groups, in any sororities or, you know, fraternities, things like that, there are usually, you know, alum chapters in different cities. So I always go with the things that you're passionate about, and try and find others that are into it too. I joined like a tennis doubles group when I moved to Providence, where we would go, you know, play and then go for, you know, lunch or something after. So trying to make a list of things that you really enjoy, and trying to network with others that have the same passions.
I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that, but I totally agree with you, Joanna. Like, getting involved with Wagner after graduating has like opened up my entire world of all of these amazing people, and making new friends through that. And also like sometimes playing sports, like even if you didn't play sports at Wagner, there's a lot of rec sports out there, especially in the city. I know of people who like played kickball just for fun, and you just make friends through doing that. So I think also looking at Meetup, a quick little Google search will kind of open up your world of different ways of meeting people. So yeah, so let's see. Let's get in one last question. So I think this one might be similar to some of the things that we've talked about, but I think it's a more specific question. How do you ease the transition between being in college, always around friends and like-minded people, to the real world?
I think for me, what was funny when I first graduated and came home is that although I still had my same core group of friends, you really start to notice that, you know, your maturity level is in such a different place. And so, you know, as opposed to undergrad where your weekends are, you know, at the local bars, or you're hanging out in the dorm room, blasting music, having a good time, now the goals become, you know, when are we taking our first girls trip internationally? You know, what's that 5-star restaurant that we always wanted to go to, or we always drove past in high school, but now that we're all working, we can actually afford to go there. And so I think, you know, your goals just change, you know, your intellect level changes, your conversations start to change, and it's just a natural evolution of who you are. Just embrace it. My advice is really to embrace that, right? When you start to notice those things, really own that and feel good knowing that you're leveling up, you're evolving as a person, you're evolving as a professional, and that it's okay. It's okay to outgrow situations. It's okay to outgrow people and different types of conversations, and have fun with that. Have fun discovering who you are now as an adult with a college degree, entering into their adult journey.
I love that. And I think that idea of being really intentional with how you spend your time in that transition, and I think that recognition of you're going to have friends of convenience during college and people that you are just around because of the circumstances. But over time, you're going to find those relationships and those people that are of substance and that are really lifetime connections. And they might be friends from college or people that you meet along the way. But the longer you get out of that mindset, the more you're realizing that the time you have to take and the intentionality of keeping those relationships engaged and strong, that I think that's a piece that it's okay. And your circle will get smaller. It doesn't mean those people that you were social with in college go away, but knowing that your time is really precious as you transition to that next chapter and that next stage of life, and that all of that is okay. And that's also normal.
Also, sometimes just to like really focus in on the like-minded people aspect of it. I think that, you know, getting outside of necessarily the comfort zone and those same exact conversations that you had with people in college and, you know, branching out on some of the things that you learn about, that's where a lot of growth can happen. Obviously, you don't want to surround yourself with people that you disagree with, but people who kind of challenge you and introduce new ideas to you. You know, that's one of the exciting things about leaving such a small, tight-knit place like Wagner or your friend circle in college. You can really learn a lot more about what's out there as well.
All right, so we're at time. Thank you all so much for your perspectives, for your stories, for your wisdom, for your advice. Kristin, you want to close us out?
I want to thank everybody for coming, and I really would love to thank our panelists for this wonderful conversation and getting all these insightful answers from everybody. And in just a few months, we'll see you guys as alumni, the guests. So thank you so much for attending. Everybody have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.